Welcome to Inclusion Revolution here on Eastlink TV. We're very pleased you could join us this week, and our guest is Cynthia Carroll from the Autism Centre of Nova Scotia, located here in Halifax. And one of the things I'm really excited about to have you here, Cynthia, is because this is an area that has been evolving fast. We hear a lot about autism. We hear, of course, more and more youth experiencing autism or being identified as living with the spectrum of autism. And I think that it was really timely to get you on here, and I know that your centre is doing some incredible work. So first of all, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Tova. It's a pleasure to be here.
So as you know, Inclusion Revolution is really all about supporting persons with all types of disabilities in accessing best practices, the latest information, and cutting-edge programming. And one of the things that really attracted me to your agency is your forward thinking and the fact that you see your clientele, or people with the autism spectrum, as being capable of having filling and wonderful lives, which isn't exactly what we've learned in the media. Of course, we never really learn quite what's going on from the media. And I'm really interested in hearing, first and foremost, if you can tell me a little bit about your centre and your goals, your overall goals, and then we'll get into some of the specifics if we can.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, the Provincial Autism Centre was founded in 2002, and we actually started as an information resource library. The centre was actually founded by Jack and Joan Craig, and they raised some with autism in a generation where there were no supports or resources or accessible information about autism. So the challenge that they had 50 years ago, he's 55 now, was, you know, if your child was different, like many other disabilities, you know, the option was to maybe institutionalize them or keep them kind of hidden away. So as Joan and Jack raised their son, they really dreamed of a place where parents could go and find reliable and accurate information on a lot of things that you just talked about, Tova. You know, what are best practice treatment approaches, you know, what services are available in your community or community close to you. And that's really what the centre was founded, with that kind of value and core principles in mind. And then over the last few years, the centre has really grown, and the centre really has focused on a needs-based approach. So what are the needs and the service gaps, you know, currently in Halifax, but also across Nova Scotia? And before we actually started any kind of formal programming, we did a needs assessment survey across the province, and spoke with some parents and individuals on the autism spectrum and said, you know, what is it that you would like to see, or, you know, what if you had a, you know, what would your dream be? And of course, you know, they were dreaming big, and as they should be. But one of the things that really came out was this community integration. You know, if they had children or teens or adults, you know, it's that sense of belonging in their community. And the centre actually started with teen and adult social groups, because the other piece of it was, you know, parents with younger children were identifying, while they've got school, you know, the early intervention was getting better. But as these children grew up, because autism is a lifespan disorder, services really slimmed out, even slimmer than they were when they were children. And there's absolutely no services for teens or adults on the autism spectrum. So we really started there and began to kind of grow our services. So as we grew our services, we continued to listen to parents and individuals on the spectrum, and you know, what were their concerns, and again, looking at service gaps. And we continued to expand over the years and started an autism arts program in partnership with the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia 3 years ago now. And that actually offers programming to children on the spectrum from ages 6 to 15. So that was actually our first program that started to look at including younger children. We still run our teen adult social groups, and we have probably about, you know, 24 individuals that come to the centre within those groups weekly. And as we continued to grow and move on, we began to notice that employment was a huge area of concern, not only for parents but also for adults. Right, and I want to stop you there, because that fascinates me. Much like in the past with the HIV community, there never used to be sort of discussion of back to work and HIV, and today it's much like that, I think, in the minds of many people. Yep. Autism and a work program, really? And I think that because of some of the stigma that I know you know all too well around the autism spectrum and people living with it, there's obviously going to be a lot of people at home right now saying, they're going to work ever? Like, that's going to happen? And of course that has a lot to do in my mind with us perhaps seeing one or two movies
that depict autism in a certain way, and we're thinking that's it. And as you and I have both discussed before the show, people don't come with instructions, and obviously each individual has to be treated as an individual, and therefore what's going on with them is going to be uniquely their experience. Yeah. But you mentioned that as an agency you evolved to the point now where you're actually looking at programming that supports persons living with autism in getting basically to work. Now before we get to that point, because I'm going to pull you back a little because I'm so excited about that piece, I want to save it a little. But what I want to ask you first is, can we just do a little bit of background talk around autism? Sure. Because I think it's really, like I said, too many of us have learned about autism through media, through dramatic stories, TV movies of the week, which are always the most extreme cases on a good day. And I guess what I wanted to ask you is, what are some of the things that you hear or get from families or people not involved in the autism community that are some of the really myths? I guess I have to say, what are the myths that are out there about autism that you'd like to correct some of those? And that's really important to me to start off, because I think some of these programs you're talking about clearly address changing some of those myths in our very lives. So if you wouldn't mind sharing with me, what are some of the things that we're all thinking about autism that really you want to straighten us out on? Yeah.
Well, I think, one of the stereotypes of autism is that, individuals with autism don't show any form of emotion, and, that's not necessarily true. I know a lot of children and adults with autism who are probably more emotional than you and I, and are able to kind of express their feelings. And there's a lot of strengths with autism. There's with autism, there's an acute attention to detail. There's, the ability to focus for long periods of time, longer than perhaps someone who might be neurotypical can focus on very fine, sometimes mundane details. There's a strength of three-dimensional thinking. It's very, and although I think part of the disability with autism is a social interaction piece around, they don't always pick up on the social rules, because that's part of the challenge with autism. But it's that honesty piece that in some situations is really quite refreshing, and we don't really recognize that, kind of in the day-to-day life. Now, Toby, the other thing too is there are many people who are living with very profound autism, and they may fit more of the stereotypical thing that you might see in the movies, and that's a very that requires a very different level of support. But I guess the message I want to get out today is autism is not always Rain Man. Right. That's one of the big stereotypes. That's right. And that's what we say. It's not Rain Man. It is a spectrum, and you're going to have some people on the spectrum who are more profoundly impacted than others. But the strengths of autism are really almost undiscovered by the workforce. And imagine if you're an employer and you have somebody who is absolutely meticulous about getting to work on time. And when I say on time, Tova, I'm not talking like 2 minutes, I'm talking right to the second for some, right? Right through to the second they're going to be on time, right?
Attention to detail.
They will not miss work. We had a volunteer at our center who, we always tell this story, it was his father's birthday, and he's a grown man. His father wanted to go to brunch, take him out to brunch because it was his birthday, and he said, "Oh no, I can't do that, today